Hello everybody and welcome to Toy To You Curator's Corner episode number 35. My name's Sean Brosnan, I'm a curator at Toy To Otago Settlers Museum and I'll be making these little stories about our pioneer history. Now for today's story we're going to go back to Squatters Gully and stick with the Buchanan family that we've been looking at over the last couple of episodes, but we're going to switch our attention today from the parents, John and Margaret, to the children. Now we've already been introduced to Isabella and Jean, who came out from Scotland on the Philip Lang in 1847-48 with their parents as little children, aged 3 and 3 months respectively. Subsequently, there was a little boy born in the cottage at Squatters Gully, and he was given the name Gilbert. He was born in 1851. Now, when we were putting together the cottage replica in 2012, I was very keen to integrate some of the small details that we knew about the Buchanan family into it, even if visitors would have no way of knowing that backstory that such minute aspects of the house referenced. It struck me, for instance, that the daub, made up of wet clay into which chopped up flax or grass was mixed and made up the daub part of the wattle and daub construction, was really just a primitive version of concrete. And I recalled from my own childhood how often wet concrete attracts children just wanting to touch it, and often leaving a permanent imprint into it once the concrete has dried. I can remember getting into trouble for that myself. Added to that was the fact that Andrew, the builder who put together the cottage replica for us, has a little girl himself who was about the same age as Isabella might have been back in 1849, and he used to often bring her along to the museum when he was working on the construction. So I asked Andrew if the next time he had his little daughter there with him on site, if he would get her to push her handprints into the wet clay. In the event, on the day that he did do this, his daughter was accompanied by her little friend, and they both pushed their hands into the wet clay. Here you can see those cute little handprints, and the serendipity of it being from two small girls takes us straight back to Isabella and Jean in 1849. Then when the cottage's replica floor was being installed using resin to fake up the clay, its manufacturer played along by pushing some nice little boot prints into the floor in about the same place. Now, I don't suppose many visitors have ever noticed those details, but for me, it's a nice wee touch that helps embed the real story of the Buchanans into our display. Another of those connections links to some objects in the display case just outside the cottage replica. Here we have a set of objects that really did belong to the Buchanans, and that must have been among the treasures from home that came out with them on the Philip Lang in the ship's chests or kists, which we have replicated inside the cottage. But the objects in the display case are actually the real artefacts from 1848. One story that attaches to them offers a delightful insight into pioneering life. Now remember that letter we have that John Buchanan wrote home to Scotland in November 1849. It's addressed to his brothers and sisters back in Kirkintilloch, and it ends with a plaintive call for them to send him out some things that he's found very hard to get into Needham's few stores, either because they weren't available, or perhaps because they were just too expensive. This request takes the form of a postscript, a PS to the letter proper, but it was pretty important to him, so he's added NB, Note Bene, to the PS, as you can see. I would feel much indebted to you for the following articles: a few yards of blue flannel or plaiting, coarse stocking yarn, a few pairs of socks, stockings for the wife and children, also a pair of shoes for each of us, likewise a quantity of striped shirting, stays for the children. Isabella and Jean want dolls and beads from their aunts. Now, the nature of mail communication at the time meant that this letter would take anything from 3 to 5 months to go by ship back to Scotland. And then any reply to it, including servicing those requests, would take the same amount of time coming back the other way, which makes for a very extended communication chain. Now, to us today, with our instantaneous digital communication, that might seem just incredibly slow and ponderous. But you've got to remember that in that period, an efficient postal service that operated across the whole British Empire was, in fact, a marvel of new technology. But what were Isabella and Jean to play with while they waited for the dearly requested dolls to come from their aunts back in Kirkintilloch? Well, among the Buchanan family treasures in the display case are these two little porcelain figurines, and they are what the little girls were allowed to use as dolls in those first years at Squatters Gully. Now, isn't that a neat inversion of the normal arrangements, where something like the figurines would usually have been treated as precious decorations, kept in a front parlour perhaps, and the sort of thing that little children would never be allowed to play with. But in the exceptional circumstances of Pioneer Dunedin, that was turned on its head. The decorations became the dolls, and looking at their condition, they seemed to be none the worse for it. Those Buchanan girls obviously looked after them with great care. It's worth pointing out that the Buchanan's treasures only survived and made it into the museum collection because, first of all, Margaret Buchanan, the mother, lived to a great old age. She died in 1900, aged 93. And secondly, she spent her final years living with her daughter Jeannie, who then inherited all that pioneering era stuff. Jeannie in turn lived to a good age, and her daughters then passed the Buchanan collection on to the museum. But what about Isabella, the oldest daughter? Well, sadly, she never made it past 20. But that is a story for another day. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed that little story, adding to our understanding of Squatters Gully and the pioneers who lived there. And if you did, you might like to subscribe to the channel to be notified of future episodes. So thanks again for watching. Until the next time, bye for now.